It is October at the time this video comes out, so as a content creator on the internet, by law, I am supposed to make a video with some sort of spooky, scary aspect to it. So I thought for this video, I will talk about one of my favorite obscure parts of Toho, that being Dolls in Pseudo Paradise. In case you don't know what Dolls in Pseudo Paradise is, it is a music CD made by Zune, but Dolls in Pseudo Paradise is sort of a black sheep when it comes to the music CDs. In case you don't know, the music CDs are composed of tracks from whatever the newest Toho games were at the time the CD comes out, as well as brand new tracks that are exclusive to the CD. But something interesting with the CDs is that they also come with a story. The stories in the CDs are mainly about two characters, Maribel and Renko, and in these stories they usually go on some sort of adventure and experience supernatural things like ghosts, yokai, and other weird things. And in addition to this, the stories are split into segments, and each track on the CD goes with a segment of the story, kind of like the background music to whatever is going on in each scene. Now what's weird about Dolls in Pseudo Paradise is that the story does not follow Maribel and Renko, and even weirder, Dolls in Pseudo Paradise has more than one story. Dolls in Pseudo Paradise was originally released at Comiket 62 in 2002, alongside the embodiment of Scarlet Devil, which means that this is actually the CD's 20th anniversary. I will go over the Comiket 62 version, but first I want to talk about the Comiket 63 version, since for the story, instead of having one story with the different tracks going with the different scenes, each track instead has its own story to go with it, and these stories can get both interesting and weird. I'll go over some of the interesting stories here, but I do recommend checking them all out on your own sometime. The first story here goes with Legend of Horai. They say that even the servants of Emperor Quan Shi Huang couldn't find the elixir of immortality. Yet what is Princess Kaguya thinking? Does she really think we can find things like the jewel branch of Horai? Now what's interesting about this is that it references the elixir of immortality, aka the Horai elixir, Princess Kaguya, and the jewel branch of Horai, which are all things that are present in Imperishable Night, which will not come out for another 2 years, so you might be thinking that perhaps this is foreshadowing Imperishable Night. Or that could be true, the things that are all mentioned in the Legend Horai story all appear in the Tale of the Bamboo Cutter, which is an old Japanese story that did inspire Imperishable Night. Personally, you could see the story as being based on the Tale of Bamboo Cutter, or foreshadowing Imperishable Night. The second story I want to go over is the one that goes with Lovely Mound of Cherry Blossoms, Japanese flower. I wonder if it's still sleeping under the cherry tree. The flower petals were once so crimson, but they get paler year by year. There may no longer be anything remaining beneath the soil. Just like the last story, this one may be foreshadowing an upcoming game at the time, being Perfect Cherry Blossom, which came out only a year after Pseudo Paradise, so it is likely that Zune at least had a good idea about the game at the time of writing that story. But just like with the last story, it is also based on an old Japanese tale, or rather an urban legend, of a cherry tree with unusually crimson cherry petals. The residents dug up the tree and they found its skeleton underneath it, with the explanation that the blood from the corpse dyed the petals red, but of course this is just an urban legend. And the last story I want to share from Comiket 63 version of Pseudo Paradise is a story that goes with Enigmatic Doll. Oh, and I want to get rid of this doll as soon as possible too, but those blue eyes, sometimes a black crow carries them away and eats them. These are real eyes, because I always put in new eyes. Okay, honestly I don't know what to say for this story, so moving on. Now let's finally talk about the story from the Comiket 62 version. This version contains the original story that is more similar to what the current music CD stories are like, with having just one story that is split into sections that go along with each track. Now I don't know the reason why Zune decided to re-release the CD with a new story. Maybe he decided that the original story was no longer canon and replaced it with stories that better suit his vision on what Gensokyo is. But now for what the story is actually about, let me just read the prologue to you. Our village of honest men originally consisted of only 8 people. We all picked up and moved to the mountains in the east. 2 years of honestly boring daily life passed us by. One day, one of us found a little hole by a peach tree. Yes, that was the day we were lost in this paradise, and right away, I'd stopped being human. So yeah, this is a story where a bunch of guys are spirited away to Gensokyo. I know, it's every Toho fan's dream, except the story ends up turning more into a nightmare. I'm not going to read the entire story to you, but I will summarize it, so here we go. Section 1. One of the guys immediately goes to a forest and sees a pirate that hands him the branch of Horai, then decapitates him. Section 2. The next morning, another one of the guys sees a dancing red and white shrine maiden. Then it rains and the shrine maiden disappears. Section 3. The rain continues and the pirate catches the guy and kills him. Section 4. All the guys have a party and one of them sneaks away from the party and of course gets killed by the pirate. Section 5. One of the guys runs away and tries to look for a way back out of paradise, but he gave up and hung himself, and for whatever reason it did not work and he was reborn and decided to keep playing human. Section 6. Everyone woke up in a dark room because they apparently all got captured by the pirate. They all made up some sort of childish escape plan, but the wisest of the group thought it was stupid, but somehow the plan works and the wisest did not leave with them, but instead got killed by the pirate. Section 7. The remaining guys went back to their boat, and it mentions how it never occurred to them to distrust each other. Section 8. You find a Western-style building in the forest to call their home, and at this point the party was only half as big as it was originally. Section 9. Somehow there was a love potion in one of the guys' morning coffee, and he fell in love with the pirate and of course died. Section 10. One of the guys starts becoming super paranoid, and that night waited for everyone else to go to bed before he went to bed. But later that night, after he fell asleep, he kept hearing a pounding sound. With every strike, he could feel his body coiling in pain. He opens his eyes to see that he was being nailed to a tree, and then he dies. Section 11. The second to last guy had its breakfast the next morning and had a hard time breathing, and realized that his food was poison. With his remaining consciousness, he wished to see the blonde shrine maiden that he saw earlier, and then he died. Section 12. The last guy left was the one who was reborn, and after realizing that he killed a number of the other guys, he decided to hang himself again. This time he was successful and there were none of the men left. Section 13. Now the story goes to a shrine maiden who presumably is making a note in a journal. She says that she saw a blonde girl walk out of a Western-style building in a forest. She stuck her tongue out at her and walked towards the exit to paradise. The story closes saying that now there are 8 less people in the paradise called Gensokyo, that the 7 corpses were carried off by yokai, and how all of this isn't really a big deal. And lastly, there is a note from Zune at the end, and it ends with Zune referring to himself as the illegitimate child of the honest men's village, the most acrophobic of the group. I didn't know that Zune had a fear of heights. So now that we have taken a look at the original Dolls and Pseudo Paradise story, we can talk about its canonicity. So as you can see from one of the last sections of the story, the place that is referred to as Paradise is Gensokyo, and there are a few things that at least resemble stuff from Gensokyo, like the old looking Western style building could be an existing location like the Scarlet Devil Mansion, but it says that the building is located in a forest, which I don't believe the SDM is in. There's also the red and white shrine maiden that one of the guys mentioned seeing, but they also describe her as being blonde, which as we know, Reimu's not, so it's unknown who this shrine maiden may be. Well, that's really all the more noticeable connections to modern Toho. There are still some other little interesting things, like how Gensokyo is referred to as Paradise, and one of Reimu's titles is the Shrine Maiden Paradise, with Paradise in the title most likely referring to Gensokyo. I'm sure there are even more little things in the story that you can relate to modern Toho. However, I'm running out of time to work on this video, so I'm going to have to cut it here, but if any of you guys notice any references in the story, then feel free to tell me in the comments. Now as to if Dolls and Pseudo Paradise is canon, I really don't know. On the Dolls in Pseudo Paradise's page on the Toho Wiki, in the notes section, it says that Zune states that the CD is meant to be genre-free, and don't really know what that is supposed to mean. Now getting more into the story side of things, the story of humans getting transported from the outside world to Gensokyo and dying there is actually a thing that happens in modern Toho, except the humans are typically eaten by yokai and not killed by a Pira or one of their own. There are other strange things like what I mentioned earlier, like the Shrine Maiden and the Western style building, but the Shrine Maiden isn't Reimu, and probably not Sane either, so if the story is canon, then it can't take place around the events of the current games. There is also the Western style building, but it's hard to tell what building that is referring to. It could be a known one like the XDM, but it doesn't make sense for it to be abandoned, and there is a possibility that it is a building that doesn't even appear outside the story. So if the Dolls in Pseudo Paradise story is canon, then perhaps it takes place in the future in Gensokyo, where there is a new red and white Shrine Maiden and an abandoned Western style building available. But personally, I think Dolls in Pseudo Paradise's story is either non-canon or in a gray area. It feels similar to PC98 Toho, where we have a Gensokyo with its own rules and characters that are similar to modern Gensokyo, but there are a bunch of little things that keep it from fitting in well with modern Toho. So that's really all I have to say for Dolls in Pseudo Paradise. Hopefully this video gets out on time. I sort of kept procrastinating on it till I ended up having to scramble to get it out by the 30th. But anyways, thank you for watching and goodbye.